Hey everyone, welcome back to Reliable Prepper. We're dealing with a significant crisis that will likely continue for months, and it's something we all need to take seriously. The 2024 U.S. port strikes have shut down nearly 43% of all imports into the country, and things are only going to get more challenging. We're not just talking about delayed shipments or empty shelves. This very well may be a long-term disruption that could affect global supply chains, energy production, transportation, and even financial systems. In this video, we're going to break down how this strike could impact daily life and what it means for the future. Before we get into it, make sure you follow Reliable Prepper on Facebook for more updates, and hit that subscribe button here so you don't miss any of our content. Let's get started. So let's start with the basics of what's happening. On October 1st, 2024, nearly 50,000 dock workers from the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA, went on strike, shutting down some of the biggest ports on the East and Gulf coasts. These include New York, Savannah, and Houston, ports that handle billions of dollars worth of goods every day. We're talking about everything from food and cars to medical supplies, and with the ports closed, the consequences are starting to pile up fast. Why did this strike happen? Well, the dock workers are asking for significant wage increases up to 77% over 6 years, along with better working conditions and job security. Meanwhile, the port operators, represented by the U.S. Maritime Alliance, say they can't meet these demands without severely impacting operations. Neither side has budged, and there's no resolution in sight. Experts are warning that this could go on for weeks or even months. Let's put this in context. The last time we saw something like this was back in 1977, when a similar strike lasted over 2 months. At that time, we had more resilient supply chains with warehouses filled with extra stock. Today, that's not the case. Most industries operate on just-in-time inventory systems, which means goods arrive exactly when they're needed, with very little extra in storage. It's an efficient system, but it's also highly vulnerable to disruptions like this one. Even just a few days of delays can cause problems. Now we're looking at weeks and possibly months of disruptions. The ripple effects are also being felt globally. European and Asian markets rely heavily on U.S. ports for shipping, and the delays are creating bottlenecks across multiple industries. Some companies are attempting to reroute shipments through the West Coast or Canada, but those ports are already overwhelmed. As more goods get stuck in limbo, we're likely to see shortages in electronics, clothing, and even raw materials for factories. It's not just about food. This is impacting industries across the board. Economists estimate that the strike is costing the U.S. economy between $3.7 and $4.5 billion a day. Retailers, who are already stretched thin from supply chain issues during the pandemic, are scrambling to stock up for the holiday season. But even with advanced planning, there's only so much they can do. Some products, particularly perishable goods like fresh fruits and vegetables, have short shelf lives and can't be stored for long. As delays continue, grocery store prices will rise, and we'll likely see shortages of certain items. Looking ahead, the long-term impacts could be even more serious. If the strike continues for several months, we could see major shifts in global trade routes. Countries in Europe and Asia may rethink their reliance on U.S. ports, potentially leading to new trade agreements and a realignment of global supply chains. This would have lasting consequences for the U.S. economy, especially for industries heavily dependent on imports and exports. When economic strain sets in, history shows us that civil unrest often follows. We saw this in 2008 during the financial crisis. Economic uncertainty led to protests, looting, and even riots in some areas. If the port strike continues, we could see similar unrest in urban centers across the U.S. It's important to recognize that cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Houston are particularly vulnerable because they depend heavily on imports. As store shelves go empty and prices rise, frustration builds. This doesn't necessarily mean full-scale riots, but it could lead to an increase in crime, looting, and protests as people struggle to deal with the economic fallout. The strain on the supply of essential goods will exacerbate the stress on local communities. Security becomes a top priority in these situations. For those living in densely populated areas, it's important to be prepared for potential civil unrest. Securing your home should be at the top of your list. Reinforce doors and windows with stronger materials and make sure your home security system is functioning properly. Motion-activated floodlights and surveillance cameras can serve as deterrents for potential intruders. Beyond securing your own home, it's also smart to think about community security. Building relationships with your neighbors can be a powerful tool in times of crisis. If law enforcement is overwhelmed or slow to respond, communities that band together and support each other will be better positioned to stay safe. This could mean organizing a neighborhood watch or setting up a mutual aid network to share resources and information. Another factor to consider is how civil unrest could impact transportation networks. When protests or riots break out, public transportation often grinds to a halt. Roads can become impassable, either because of blockades or damage from unrest. If you rely on public transportation for work or access to essential services, make sure you have a backup plan. Biking, carpooling with neighbors, or even walking may become necessary if public transportation is disrupted. Having multiple options for getting around ensures you'll stay mobile even when traditional systems are down. One of the lesser discussed effects of the port strikes is the impact on energy and infrastructure. Ports are not just entry points for consumer goods, they're also critical for importing fuel and parts needed to maintain our power grid. Delays in shipments of natural gas, diesel, and maintenance equipment could lead to power outages or fuel shortages in some areas. The Northeast and California are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of disruptions. The Northeast relies heavily on heating oil and natural gas imports to keep homes warm during the winter, while California's aging power grid is already prone to blackouts during periods of high demand. If these regions can't get the fuel and equipment they need, rolling blackouts or prolonged power outages become a real possibility. This is where investing in alternative energy sources becomes crucial. Renewable energy like solar power or wind turbines can offer a reliable backup when the grid fails. Solar energy in particular is a great option because it's self-sustaining and doesn't rely on external fuel shipments. Even if you don't have a full solar system installed, starting small with a few panels and battery storage could be a game changer if the power goes out for extended periods. This setup can keep essential devices like refrigerators, medical equipment, and communication systems running. If solar isn't viable for you, consider a wind turbine or even a microhydro system if you have access to running water. Diversifying your energy sources ensures you're not relying on any one system to keep your home powered. In addition to renewable energy, it's smart to have a backup supply of fuel for a generator. Stock up on enough fuel to last several months and keep spare parts on hand for repairs, since supply chains could make it hard to get these items later on. We also need to consider how energy disruptions can affect other critical services. Water treatment plants, hospitals, and emergency services rely on a stable power supply to function. If the grid goes down, these services could be compromised. Having backup water purification systems and basic first aid knowledge is essential in these scenarios. Make sure you have a plan for how to stay informed and communicate with emergency services during a crisis if power and internet access are down for an extended time. The most immediate effect of the port strikes that most people are feeling is the disruption to the food supply chain. For example, ports like Wilmington, Delaware, handle over 1.2 million metric tons of bananas each year, which accounts for around 25% of the country's banana supply. And that's just one type of perishable good. Other goods, such as berries, meats, and dairy products, are also at risk of shortages. Prices for these products have already jumped by 10 to 15%, and this is just the beginning. But it's not just fresh produce that's at risk. Processed foods, which rely on imported raw materials like sugar, flour, and oils, are also being affected. For example, the U.S. imports over 2 million metric tons of sugar each year, much of it through the affected ports. Without that supply, factories that produce everything from baked goods to candies and beverages are starting to scale back production. This will likely lead to even higher prices and widespread shortages in the months ahead. So, what does this mean for us? It means we need to think beyond just today's shortages. If this strike continues, it could take months or even years for the supply chain to fully recover. That's why it's important to think about long-term food storage and preservation methods. Freezing, canning, and dehydrating foods are great ways to ensure you have enough to last through potential shortages. Rice, beans, pasta, and canned meats are all excellent options because they're calorie-dense and store well for extended periods. In addition to storing long-lasting foods, growing your own food is another way to supplement your supply. Even a small garden with herbs, tomatoes, and leafy greens can add a fresh element to your meals. Plus, having access to fresh produce could be critical if shortages worsen or become prolonged. Bartering may also become more valuable as shortages increase. Items like canned goods, hygiene products, and durable tools could become high-value trade items in local communities where goods are harder to come by. Stocking up on tradable items now can help provide security if the situation worsens. The healthcare industry is also feeling the impact of these port strikes. Nearly 50% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, used in U.S. drug production come through the affected ports. That means hospitals and pharmacies are starting to experience shortages of essential medications like insulin, antibiotics, and even common over-the-counter medications like ibuprofen. The American Hospital Association estimates that the U.S. healthcare system relies on over $60 billion worth of imported pharmaceuticals annually. With half of these imports now delayed, hospitals are rationing medications, and pharmacies are struggling to keep shelves stocked. So, what does this mean for us? If you or someone in your household relies on prescription medications, now is the time to secure additional supplies. This could mean asking your healthcare provider for a larger prescription or looking into alternatives that have longer shelf lives. It's also worth considering herbal and natural remedies. For example, garlic, honey, and oregano oil have antibacterial properties that could serve as natural antibiotics in certain situations. On top of this, it's crucial to stock up on over-the-counter medications and first aid supplies. Pain relievers, fever reducers, antihistamines, and disinfectants could become hard to find if the strikes drag on. Having a well-stocked first aid kit and the knowledge to handle minor injuries or infections at home could be essential if professional medical services are limited or overwhelmed. In the worst-case scenario, learning basic medical skills like wound care and how to treat common infections could be life-saving. Consider taking a first aid course or investing in medical guides that teach these skills. Having the knowledge and supplies to manage medical needs at home will provide a sense of security as healthcare systems become strained. The transportation and manufacturing sectors are also being hit hard by the strikes. Automakers and factories that rely on imported parts, such as semiconductors and steel, are feeling the pinch. The U.S. imports around $300 billion worth of automotive parts each year, and with nearly half of those imports going through the now closed ports, production is slowing across the country. Some automakers have already scaled back production due to parts shortages, which will likely lead to higher prices for new vehicles and longer wait times for repairs. Public transportation is also being impacted. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or MTA, in New York City, for example, imports about 20% of its railcar parts. These delays in transportation infrastructure could cause longer delays and breakdowns in buses, trains, and subways, particularly in urban areas that depend heavily on these systems. For those who rely on personal vehicles, it's essential to keep them well maintained during this period of disruption. Stocking up on oil filters, spark plugs, and other vehicle parts could be critical, as the ability to repair vehicles could become more limited. Even minor repairs may become difficult due to the scarcity of parts, so being prepared ahead of time is key. If you depend on public transportation, consider alternative options. Bicycles, scooters, or even walking may become necessary if public transit is delayed or canceled. Having a flexible plan for getting around ensures you can still access essential services if traditional systems are impacted. Beyond the supply chain and logistical disruptions, the port strikes are also contributing to rising inflation. As goods become harder to source, prices are climbing. Economists expect the U.S. Consumer Price Index, or CPI, to increase by 1% to 2% in the coming months due to ongoing supply chain issues. Inflation is already at its highest point in decades, and this crisis could drive prices even higher. Everyday items could become more expensive and harder to find as the strike drags on. To protect yourself financially, diversifying your assets can be a good strategy. Precious metals like gold and silver tend to hold their value during times of inflation. Stocking up on essential goods and focusing on becoming more self-sufficient are also critical steps to take. Bartering goods like batteries, hygiene products, and fuel could become valuable commodities in a crisis economy where cash becomes less reliable. It's also essential to reduce your financial reliance on external systems. Pay down debt where you can, cut back on unnecessary expenses, and build up an emergency fund. By doing this, you'll be better positioned to weather financial instability. Exploring alternative income streams, whether through freelancing, part-time work, or growing your own food, can help reduce the impact of potential layoffs or job loss during the strike. Industries that rely heavily on imports, such as retail and manufacturing, may face significant job losses if the strike continues. If you work in one of these sectors, now is the time to prepare for potential unemployment or reduced hours. Build up a financial cushion and explore ways to diversify your skills so you can pivot to new opportunities if needed. The 2024 U.S. port strikes are far from over, and their effects will ripple through every aspect of our lives for months to come. We're facing disruptions in food, medicine, energy, and transportation that will challenge us all in different ways. Preparing for the long-term impacts of these strikes will be essential in navigating the uncertainty ahead. It's important to stay proactive. Whether it's securing your home, stocking up on essential goods, or finding ways to become more self-sufficient, the steps we take now will make a big difference in how we get through this crisis. Thanks for joining me today. Be sure to follow Reliable Prepper on Facebook for updates. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future content. Stay safe, stay prepared, and we'll get through this together.